Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hey everybody, I'm Troy Moling, and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. Hope everyone is having a wonderful day. We've got a jam-packed show for you this week. We'll sit down with our market analyst in a second, but first I want us to get a check on the crop and harvest numbers. Recent rain and snow has slowed things down, but we're getting back on track. Starting with corn, and 96% of the crop is now mature. Corn harvest is 39% complete, up from 34% last week. 65% of the winter wheat crop is planted. 44% of the crop has emerged. It was at 35% this time last year. On to soybeans, and harvest is 38% complete. That's behind last year's pace of 47% and a 5-year average of 53%. With more on soybeans, Luke Beckman with Central Valley Ag joins us in the market analyst chair this week. We begin our conversation with a look at how this season's weather has been a constant struggle for soybean farmers.
I think it's a little bit early, Troy, to know exactly what the damage or the extent of loss might be. I think guys are getting into the field probably as we're sitting down to have this conversation. So they'll know, they'll find out what's out there. I think it creates a conversation where, the yield last Friday in the USDA numbers, or last week, excuse me, saw the soybean yield go up. Do we see an opportunity for that to be pared back, just depending on what the extent of loss is? So I think harvest loss from shattered pods, and then what sort of quality issues are we going to run into? Those are probably the two main concerns for farmers.
Any recommendations for farmers who are feeling it pretty bad right now?
Well, I think if you have quality concerns with those soybeans that are coming out, it probably just depends on what your plan is. If you were planning on binning those beans on farm, a quality problem that goes into the bin will probably get worse, as it stays there. So you may need to readjust your plans. You're not going to be able to hold those beans as long, which means you're not going to be able to capture, the carry like maybe you thought you would. So I think you need to have some conversations with your crop insurance agent about, how that impacts your yield, and there may be some claims that are available in those types of situations. So I think you have to just look at what you have in the field and make decisions based on what's there.
Okay, so taking a look at the crop progress report, USDA showed that soybean harvest at 38%, so that's 6% above where we were for harvest last week. The majority of soybean producing states running behind also. Any room for optimism with those numbers?
At face value, obviously we're behind. I think the market's more concerned about what does the next 6 to 10 days look like. It looks great. I think we're going to see a majority of soybean harvest get completed by the end of October with this open week. So I don't think that's a concern anymore. It was, I think, coming in Monday, the weekend weather was part of the reason for the friendly day on Monday. But I think that overall soybean harvest, we're going to have our hands around it, in another week or 2 weeks. It was a good crop before we had the weather. We'll know more in 7 to 10 days.
What are some other things you've been following? Maybe some good opportunities for 2019?
Absolutely. I mean, Monday this past week, beans having, a strong day, corn having a strong day. We saw the export inspections numbers on Monday. We had a cargo of beans out of the Gulf, a cargo of beans out of the PNW. That had China attached to them. Is there any depth to that? Probably not, but I think that psychologically it was supportive enough to get beans through some key technical objectives. And all of a sudden the charts look a lot better. I think what that does is it just gives farmers a good opportunity to, make sales. If they're beans that are coming to town in the fall, we've really been talking to guys about what does that farm average look like, even with sales, down at these levels, if you can layer those into better sales you made early, and then you talk about the market facilitation program, and how does that work into the farm average that you're going to achieve for the year.
And so you're with Central Valley Ag. What are some of the big questions farmers have been asking you guys this time of year, and what do you tell them?
Sure. I think that, with the rally that we've had, some questions about 2019. We've actually seen pretty good engagement from our farmer producers, in the deferred months, and that's both for old crop soybeans, old crop corn, and new crop corn. I'd say new crop soybeans, guys are a little more patient yet, but these 19 futures are above $4. A question we always like to ask our guys, at least recently, has been, what % of your corn crops in the last 4 years have you sold north of $4 December futures? And I think it gives people an opportunity to think about that. And there's a lot of conversations going on between the new crop corn and soybean price ratio, and corn needs to steal some acres because we do have a nice demand story going on. So we should see higher corn prices. And I don't disagree with the argument, but I think that can be a little bit dangerous. When you're presented with the opportunity, I think that's more important. And so it's giving us an opportunity to get some sales on north of 4, especially if producers are looking at 2019 inputs. If they've booked fertilizer, if they're starting to look at seed, you're making some of those purchases. I think you can hedge those input costs by selling grain at the same time.
Okay, and before we let you go, there was the news regarding ethanol and E15 last week. Trump has that push to get that into gas stations year-round by next summer. What are your thoughts?
Well, I certainly think it's positive. I do not think it's going to be a fast-moving news story. There's going to be litigation. There's going to be the rulemaking process that precedes that by the EPA. And then you have to question the infrastructure upgrade across the country, for a lot of these gas stations to carry that. I think it's been well documented that 1%, of the fueling stations across the U.S., are even equipped to handle it. So there's just a lot of things that need to happen. Is it positive? It is. I just think it's going to take some time before, we can really see this translate into, higher ethanol demand.
Next week, we'll be joined by Dr. Josh Maples from Mississippi State University. We'll go through the Cattle on Feed report and chat about the latest happenings in the livestock market. If you have a question you'd like for me to ask Josh, email us or get in touch on social media, and I'll pass your question along. September 30th was going to be a big day, the passage of the 2018 Farm Bill. Only here we are in October, and there's no new bill yet. The legislation for the Farm Bill is complex. It includes funding for things like crop insurance, school lunches, SNAP benefits, and a host of others. University of Nebraska ag economist Dr. Brad Lubben joined me to talk about what's taking so long and where we go from here.
We were waiting for a compromise that could be reached in September, right, to put a bill together and put it through Congress before the Farm Bill expired at the end of the month. It didn't happen. Not only did we not pass a new Farm Bill, we didn't even extend current policy. So we really live in limbo at the moment, waiting on new action. It's still going to be a difficult road ahead to try and get to a compromise bill. The same hurdles that held up the process ever since July, the same hurdles that couldn't get jumped over, couldn't get moved through in September are still there. Now the negotiating team, the big four, the chairman and the ranking members of both the House and Senate Ag committees talk about moving a compromise through by mid-November with the goal of reaching a final bill that could still be passed in a lame duck session of Congress. But that's still some big hurdles ahead.
And of course, not every program associated with the Farm Bill is going to suffer. Some are going to suffer more than others. Talk about some that may be in trouble because of the delay.
Yeah. Because of the delay and the fact that not only was a new Farm Bill not passed, but an extension of the current bill was not passed, we technically have sort of a mix of extension, or I should say a mix of continuing authority along with some programs that effectively have been killed. We have some programs that run for the program year, the commodity year, the crop programs, the dairy support programs. Those technically don't revert to what we call permanent legislation until 2019. Dairy is that first commodity that would get hit on January 1st. Thus, we often call December 31st the dairy cliff or the milk cliff. If we really don't get something done before the end of the year, we talk about permanent legislation, which is enough of a hammer to remember that we got to get something done. But until we get something done, there are some programs that continue on because they have permanent authority. That's crop insurance and disaster assistance, but it's also SNAP, one of the biggest hurdles here yet to be negotiated. And then there are a mix of programs where authority technically expired at the end of September, and you might be able to service existing contracts but not write new ones. or you might literally have to close down programs in the interim here until we get new authority. So we have a mix of hurt across the board right now in terms of farm programs and farm bill legislation, waiting on that final compromise to come.
What's it going to take to make a deal, you think?
If we really can't get a new farm bill put together in November to be voted through in December, then you back up and you pass an extension of current policy for a year or more and effectively punt the new farm bill to the new Congress.
So why do people bring up the 1949 thing if it's not even a threat that is feasible in the first place?
Well, it's a threat in the sense of it's always this harbinger out there that says this is the permanent authority, last amended in 1949. If you don't write new legislation, that's what we revert to. We don't just shut down USDA and end farm programs and walk away if we can't do something new. We revert to that permanent legislation that effectively ensures that we will get the job done. Maybe late, but we will get the job done. We can't afford to not get it done. One could eliminate someday, talk about eliminating the permanent authority and effectively kill that as well. But then when a farm bill expires, it expires. And there's nothing until you find the political coalition and support to do something new.
Okay.
The permanent legislation sits there yet today as a way to ensure that something new happens on a regular basis.
Keep it tuned right here to Market Journal. We're following the Farm Bill story and we'll have updates as news develops. Moving on, and last week we spoke with Dr. Ken Hellevang. He's an agricultural engineer with North Dakota State University Extension and an expert when it comes to grain storage. This week we continue our conversation and begin with why it's always a good idea to store grain in a structure that's been built specifically for storing grain.
Well, the strength of the building was really the first thing that I encourage people to think about. Most of our buildings are not designed to handle the load of the grain pushing on the wall. So we need to verify whether we can actually pile grain on the wall. It's more difficult to fill and unload a building, and we still need to think of aeration. We need to have air exchange so we can cool that pile to winter storage temperatures and control that temperature, maintain the right moisture contents, similar to what we would with any other storage.
And any advice for farmers on what they can do to reduce the possibility of insect infestation in stored grain?
With insects, the first thing is making sure that the storage is clean to start out with. There should not be any leftover grain that's in that bin or structure. We recommend anything that's going into storage to have a grain protectant on that grain and applied to the bin wall. And then controlling the temperature. Controlling the temperature, I think, is the single, again, point that I would emphasize. We can really control insect infestations by controlling the grain temperature, cooling it down for winter storage.
And I was speaking with one of our market analysts one time a few weeks back, and she mentioned that the U.S. has a shortage of grain bins. Do you see that as a major issue, especially with some of the excess grain that has been stored up over the past couple seasons?
Absolutely. We have a recent stock report indicating how much grain is stored both on farm and off farm, and it shows that we have a lot of grain in storage already. And that's before we start our corn and soybean harvest. There just are not enough bins that are available. The window to build a bin is rapidly passing, and so we really are thinking of alternative storage options to get us through at least this fall and part of our storage season.
And our last question, then we'll let you go. What are some of the top questions that farmers ask you when it comes to grain storage, and what do you tell them to some of those most asked questions?
Well, I get asked kind of a whole variety of questions. It's a little difficult to pick what might be the most common question, but many people are looking at, how do I aerate this grain? How much fan is required? And sometimes it's surprising that if we're putting dry grain into a storage and we're just running air to control the temperature, we can do that with a fairly small fan. Just a 2-3 horse fan can aerate probably 50,000 bushels of grain. And so frequently people think that it needs to be a huge fan, and it doesn't need to be a very large fan. Now, if we're trying to dry the grain, take off a couple, 3 points of moisture, that's where we're going to need a lot of airflow. And many of our bins today really are not designed to air dry in that bin. So they need to investigate whether drying in the bin is an option that's available, and really look at selecting a fan that's appropriate for the job.
You can see part 1 of our interview with Dr. Hellevang on the Market Journal YouTube page. Really interesting stuff, and we appreciate him taking the time to join us on the show. Now, for those who want to get in the know about H2O, there's the Nebraska Water Center. I sat down with Crystal Powers and Jesse Starita to learn about what the Nebraska Water Center does and hear about an upcoming event that you'll want to check out.
The Nebraska Water Center is a state and national leader in really 3 areas. We focus on teaching, research, and then extension education. Those are the 3 primary focus areas. And topically, we're looking at water science, water management, and water policy, principally. And the goal there in doing that is to manage water wisely in a way that serves the interests of Nebraska and Nebraskans. And so a couple of specific areas of what we do within that are fostering the careers of new water researchers and young students. We also expose undergraduate students to water sciences through a course here at the university for freshman to senior level students. We do some great work, I think, with publications and an annual tour that actually gets out into the field, be it in Nebraska or other states, and kind of connects the research that the University of Nebraska is doing to the field.
So what is it that makes water research in Nebraska so interesting?
I think the key part of that is because water impacts all of us. So whether you're the ag producer out in the field needing water for the cropping system, or you're a community, small community, big community, we've got people at all different levels that need water on a daily basis. And so what we try to do is increase the impact of our research and extension faculty here on campus. And so we do that, one of the key ways we do that is through fostering partnerships, whether that be across disciplines on campus, and we cover all the campuses of the University of Nebraska system, as well as some of our small state and local colleges. So we try to integrate faculty on research projects, as well as help connect them with partners throughout the state. So that could be farmers, or it could be small communities, natural resource districts, or even state agencies to increase the impact of the project when it gets finished.
And Jesse, you may want to take this one. I know that this is kind of the baby that you're working on as far as the Water Symposium that's coming up later in October. What can you tell us about it?
Yeah, well, we're excited for it, I think, for a number of reasons. Just really quickly about the high-level basics, October 24th through 26th at Nebraska Innovation Campus in the Conference Center. The goal, Troy, for this symposium is to take a look at water in the Missouri and Arkansas River basins from more of a regional and basin scale. Typically, our Nebraska Water Center symposiums have focused primarily on water in Nebraska. But as we know, water is interconnected And of course, rivers transcend state boundaries and political boundaries of all kinds. So I think it's important for people to come together, and we're looking forward to having folks within the basin from a 9-state region. We'll have people from their particular water centers, so the counterparts to ours here, but we'll also have, beyond the researchers, some of our faculty and water managers in Nebraska and in the broader region. We have a student poster competition, and we'll have quite a few talks on agriculture. I know that was something that may be of interest to viewers, is what are the impacts and what are the relationships between water and agriculture, and what is the state of the science?
And I know there's another particular project that you're working on. What can you tell us about it?
Sure. We've got another project that's really focused on sustaining the Ogallala Aquifer. This is a joint project across several states that are part of that aquifer. And so what we're trying to do is more accurately model that system so that we can make some research guesses at how different management strategies can affect how that water supply will carry us on into the future. And that, since most of our irrigated agriculture is based on that aquifer, we view that as one of our really important research projects as we move ahead.
Troy, I'd like to just add one more really quick point,
sure,
if I may. The context for the Nebraska Water Center. So the Nebraska Water Center, it's a part of the Water for Food Global Institute.
Yes.
And that's an important point to raise, just because, as Crystal was describing this Ogallala Water Project, quite a few of the researchers and the leaders who are participating in this project are in some way, shape, or form involved in the Water for Food Institute. So the center is part of, I guess, this broader shift at the University of Nebraska in emphasis on these large global challenges in producing enough food supply without, jeopardizing our water resources.
Gotcha. Thanks to Crystal and Jesse for stopping by to talk to me. Market Journal will have a crew at the Water Symposium, and we'll have a wrap-up of the event on an upcoming show. Seed singulation is something most farmers are aware of, but don't always pay attention to at the start of the year. But when singulation and spacing errors show up, they impact yield. Over the last 2 years, AGCO has researched corn seed singulation and spacing at plots across the Midwest, including Nebraska. It's done through modifying a seed disc by covering 2 holes and drilling 2 additional holes in another place. They compared singulation from these goof plates with singulation from correct seed discs and found a difference of over 6% in seed singulation. Read more about AGCO's study in the October Nebraska Farmer. It's now time for weather with Nebraska Extension ag climatologist and Market Journal chief meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, it was a downright frigid start to the week. Lately, though, it hasn't felt too bad out there. How does the upcoming week look for us?
Well, Troy, you are correct. We have had such a wild week, and we are really looking for an extended period of dry weather to help get some of this harvest activity caught up. Of course, we had the storm last weekend that dropped some pretty significant snowfall across portions of southeast Nebraska. Cold air got in here a little bit quicker, and the heavier moisture, instead of being in northeastern Kansas, moved up into southeast Nebraska. We had a lot of widespread 2 to 4 inch snowfalls with some isolated 6 to 8 inch totals reported in the Friend-Milford area and then to the northwest of Fairbury. We're on the Lincoln area here proper, anywhere from 3 to upwards of 5 inches on the outskirts of the city. So some very heavy wet snow brought a complete cease to activity, and then temperatures in 2 days, we're seeing 70 degrees across the state with dry weather. So we expect that the harvest will wrap up rather quickly, at least in this next 7 to 10 days for the beans. It doesn't look like any impending weather. Now, in terms of snow, let's look at the official winter forecast. And this is the first shot at it by CPC. Above normal temperatures projected for the west, normal to the east. In terms of precipitation, typical El Nino pattern, wet to the south, dry to the northwest and the upper Great Lakes region. And I would say that if this verifies, that we will see below normal temperatures across a good portion of the southern United States. In terms of what's going on presently, the system that brought some light showers to the region Thursday night is now amplified into a trough over the Great Lakes, bringing a shot of cooler air to northeastern Nebraska and eastern Nebraska as cold Canadian high pressure filters down toward the southeast. Warmer air as we get to the west starts to build in, but you'll notice nothing in the way of any precipitation to deal with, most of it along the frontal boundary to our south. This trough begins to lift on Sunday, bringing the return to warmer air, although a surface low is shown to develop over portions of north central Nebraska. There is no moisture to speak of with this system to work on, so we will see most of the moisture in the southwestern United States. And on Monday, this trough weakens even further. We do see some more ridging taking place, much warmer conditions again on store as we see the low pressure starting to show signs of development in the Texas Panhandle. This is some monsoonal moisture fleeting northward, so we'll see some moisture in the southwest, but it's signs of things to come as we see this high pressure ridge building in the center of the part of the country as we get into Tuesday. Very dry conditions across the central United States, with most of the moisture going to be associated down south as a tropical surge comes in from another system coming up the Baja Peninsula that'll get trained in the little trough moving across the southern United States and develop into a fairly significant storm system for the southeastern United States. But for us, high pressure remains in control for the most part. Most of the precipitation, if any gets in here, will be in extreme southeastern Nebraska, and right now this might be overplaying it somewhat. But as this system begins to move to the east, you can see this trough strengthening, widespread heavy precipitation as the surface low gets energized, bringing a lot of moisture into this region from the Gulf and from the jet dynamics. Heavy, heavy precipitation from the lower Mississippi River Valley, but dry in our region. Then as we get into Friday, we get a little shortwave trough starting to move in from Canada, bringing us some cooler conditions. Low pressure shown at the surface to be in northwestern Missouri. We may see some light precipitation with this, but the heavy moisture once again is to our east. So we look at the 8 to 14 day forecast. Next Thursday, the following Tuesday, cooler east, warm to our west, and in terms of precipitation, well above normal to our southeast. So Troy, it looks like good harvest weather for the most part for the next 10 days.
Thanks, Al. That's going to do it for this week's show, but we appreciate you taking the time to join us. On our next episode, we'll learn what proposed changes in ethanol could mean for farmers. Plus, hear how to be a part of an upcoming weed seminar. We'll see you right back here next time. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.